Salam sejahtera, anda sedang menyaksikan Niaga AWANI bersama Sani dan Rozman, dan seperti biasa jam ini kami akan bawakan pelbagai rangkuman berita, niaga dan ekonomi untuk anda lihat bagaimana ketika ini dunia perniagaan dan juga pasaran bukan dari peringkat nasional tapi sehinggalah ke peringkat global. Dan saya akan mulakan antara dapatan kajian ataupun statistik daripada Jabatan Perangkaan Malaysia telah berkongsi mengenai bagaimana untuk kita melihat antara highlight penunjuk ekonomi Malaysia, indeks pelopor dan juga serentak susulan untuk bulan Mac 2025. Di sini ekonomi Malaysia dijangka terus berkembang walaupun perlahan dengan indeks pelopor mencatatkan peningkatan 0.6% pada Mac 2025. Dan kalau kita lihat antara komponen-komponen utama adalah penawaran wang benar, indeks perusahaan bursa Malaysia dan juga import benar semikonduktor dan pelbagai lagi seperti yang anda dapat lihat indeks komposit pelopor perubahan bulanan. Dan indeks komposit pelopor arah aliran jangka panjang juga dan kitaran perniagaan kalau kita melihat di sini Januari 1991 hinggalah Mac 2025. Di sini akan memberi tumpuan kepada pelbagai indeks daripada puncak kawah sehinggalah puncak kawah. Di sini kalau anda melihat prestasi yang agak naik turun daripada tahun 1991 dan tahun 1990-an. Di sini adalah indeks yang amat tinggi dengan rendah di sini pada tahun 1990-an. Namun kalau kita dapat saksikan prestasinya tidak begitu ketara selepas masuk tahun 2000 sehinggalah tahun 2025. Baik, dan ini indeks komposit pelopor dan perubahan tahunan kalau kita boleh saksikan pada Disember 2024 adalah 113.9 mata dan pada Januari 2025 adalah pada 112.6 mata, dan kalau kita lihat Februari 25 telah meningkat juga 112.6 mata dan Mac 2025 sebanyak 0.6% peningkatan. Baik, ini adalah prestasi touchscreen kalau data ataupun statistik daripada Jabatan Perangkaan Malaysia untuk kita melihat bagaimanakah indeks pelopor sorotan ekonomi. Dan kalau kita boleh saksikan di sini daripada data-data dan juga pasaran, kalau kita lihat statistik ekonomi, kita ingin melihat bagaimanakah prestasi ataupun sorotan ekonomi yang telah dikeluarkan oleh dosa melihat kepada prestasi pertumbuhan ekonomi awal tahun 2025 berada dalam keadaan baik dengan suku pertama telah mencatat kepada 4.1% dengan keadaan inflasi yang masih stabil. Dengan itu kita mempersilakan Profesor Madya Dr. Aimi Zuhalzmi Abdul Rashid merupakan penganalisis ekonomi Uni KL Business School. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Dr. kerana sudi meluangkan masa bersama kami. Sebentar saja tadi data yang saya bentangkan itu adalah antara salah satu data yang telah dikeluar dan dikongsi oleh DOSM sendiri, dan kalau data yang tidak saya kongsikan adalah melihat kepada sorotan statistik ekonomi dengan momentum pertumbuhan KDNK 4.4% dan inflasi kekal rendah sekitar 1.4%. Secara jujurnya, sejauh manakah kita boleh mempertahankan daya tahan ekonomi ini bukan sahaja dalam jangka pendek tetapi dalam jangka sederhana, terutama apabila tekanan tarif baharu dari Amerika Syarikat mula meresap ke dalam kos input dan rantaian bekalan global, di mana ramai penganalisis menjangkakan kita akan lihat kesan lebih ketara masuk suku kedua.
Assalamualaikum dan selamat pagi Nina. Terima kasih untuk saya. Pertama sekali, kalau kita lihat data-data yang telah diberikan oleh DOSM menunjukkan bahawa ekonomi kita sekarang pun telah perlahan walaupun masih dalam keadaan yang baik. Data-data yang berlaku dan apa yang kita rasakan adalah perubahan sebenarnya struktur perdagangan dunia telah pun berubah. Ia bukan menunggu suku kedua, ketiga, empat mungkin lebih besar kesannya, tetapi pada awal tahun lepas lagi banyaklah permintaan untuk barang-barang Malaysia kerana mereka menantikan apakah perubahan yang berlaku pada tahun 2025. Dan jelas apa yang berlaku pada tahun 2025 pertama pada suku pertama dan akhirnya pada bulan April yang lalu sebagai satu kuasa besar ekonomi dunia, the largest economy in the world, apa pun tindakan yang Amerika Syarikat sangatlah memberi pengaruh yang begitu besar kepada semua produk-produk kita, utamanya produk kita yang bergantung banyak kepada ekspor elektrik, semikonduktor, elektronik dan sebagainya. Dan ini merupakan ekspor kita yang terbesar ke Amerika Syarikat selain daripada barangan lain seperti sarung tangan, begitu juga dengan kelapa sawit dan sebagainya. Okey, kalau kita mahu melihat kebergantungan kita, ekonomi kita kepada pasaran ekspor hanya begitu besar, itu 140%, dan hanyalah sedikit saja ekonomi kita didorong oleh sektor domestik. Dan apa yang perlu dilakukan kalau kita mahu dan sekarang pun telah berlaku, sektor ekspor negara perlu beralih daripada Amerika Syarikat secepat mungkin. Mungkin mudah kita bercakap lah Nina. Tapi sebenarnya kita banyak perlu bekerjasama dengan negara-negara yang terlibat dalam rantaian bekalan global industri contohnya semiconductor itu sendiri dalam industri elektrik elektronik, sarung tangan getah. Kerana semuanya bukan hanya kita Malaysia tapi semua negara tersebut dalam situasi yang sama, semuanya terganggu oleh tindakan Trump. Namun begitu, ekonomi domestik kita mempunyai kekuatan yang tersendiri berdasarkan data yang kita lihat, sektor perkhidmatan yang bukan lebih dari 50% penyumbang pada KDK negara. Begitu juga dengan sektor borong dan runcit, makanan dan minuman, pelancongan, terutama dari aspek penginapan terus meningkat. Kalau kita lihat data untuk suku pertama meningkat, jumlahnya 457 bilion, peningkatan sebanyak 47%. Jadi dan juga data-data dari dosen juga menarik sebab kalau kita lihat semua sektor sebenarnya naik. Dia menunjukkan kita punya ekonomi kita punya satu resilient dia sendiri, ketahanan dia sendiri, tapi sedikit perlahan lah, itu saja Seperti sektor perkhidmatan masih kukuh 59.7%, sektor pembuatan kukuh 23%, pertanian 5.7% naik, kecuali sektor yang negatif, sedikit negatif lah, pertumbuhan yang negatif 2.7% adalah pengkuarian minyak dan gas. Kita tahu minyak dan gas ni disebabkan oleh faktor harga minyak mentah yang menurun. Bagaimanapun sektor pembinaan kita tetap mampu dan kita terus mencatatkan pertumbuhan 2 digit iaitu 13.2%, walaupun sektor pembinaan ini adalah lebih kecil daripada sektor lain, hanyalah sebesar 4.3% daripada keseluruhan ekonomi negara. Bagaimanapun Nina, kadar pengangguran kita bertambah baik walaupun berlaku pertambahan tenaga buruh pertambahan tenaga buruh iaitu kenaikan sebanyak 16.7 juta orang daripada 16.5 juta orang pada suku keempat tahun lepas. Kadar pengangguran tetap bertambah baik iaitu yang terendah 3.1%, malah lebih rendah daripada peratusan kadar pengangguran sebelum pandemik COVID-19. Jadi kesimpulannya untuk soalan ini adalah kita punya ketahanan, tetapi juga bagaimanapun sebagai sebuah negara yang mengamalkan ekonomi yang terbuka dengan terutama sekali dikenal dunia sebagai pengeksport barangan elektrik elektronik, ia tetap menjejaskan ekonomi kita, tetapi tidaklah sampai ekonomi kita meleset, tapi akan menyebabkan pace ekonomi kredit kita lebih perlahan daripada tahun-tahun lepas.
Dan Prof, berbakikan 2 minit, mungkin boleh kongsikan melihat kepada prestasi kebanyakan sektor industri berada dalam keadaan ataupun prestasi yang agak stabil, dan melihat kepada prestasi pengangguran juga berada dalam keadaan stabil, dan tumpuan khusus kepada sektor perkhidmatan yang mencatat pertumbuhan memberangsangkan sebanyak RM630 bilion. Namun kadar pengangguran hanya susut sedikit ke 3.1%. Namun adakah pertumbuhan ini benar-benar inklusif dan berupaya menyerap tenaga kerja baharu secara mampan atau sekadar menggambarkan pemulihan sektor terpilih?
Seperti yang saya katakan tadi ni, tak semua sektor, hanya satu sektor saja yang pertumbuhannya negatif. Kalau kita lihat keseluruhan sektor perkhidmatan begitu kukuh, menunjukkan kita berada pada kedudukan yang baik. Dalam konteks ini, dalam konteks pengangguran, kita sebenarnya memang pun sebagai sebuah negara yang bergantung banyak kepada sektor perkhidmatan dan juga pembuatan. Apa yang berlaku ini tidaklah bagi saya katakan akan menyebabkan ekonomi kita meleset, tetapi akan memperlahankan ekonomi kita. Masih dalam keadaan stabil, seperti yang kita cakap tadi, masih dalam mempunyai kekuatan tersendiri, dan telah pun kita Malaysia bekerjasama dengan negara lain untuk untuk merubah ataupun merungkaikan kembali rantaian bekalan setiap industri, tak kiralah sama ada elektrik elektronik maupun sarung tangan getah itu sendiri.
Okey, baik Prof, mungkin kita nak meneliti bergerak ke hadapan bagaimanakah prospek ataupun unjuran Prof terhadap suku ataupun pertumbuhan ekonomi untuk suku kedua 2025 ini dan apakah antara downside risk perlu kita teliti daripada peringkat tempatan hinggalah ke peringkat antarabangsa yang mungkin menghambatkan pertumbuhan ekonomi itu sendiri dan bagaimana untuk Malaysia leverage dalam kekuatan menjadi kepengurusan ASEAN. Bukan sahaja Malaysia akan lead ke semua negara ini tapi Malaysia sama-sama akan bangkit untuk mempelajari apakah antara strength-strength yang boleh kita adaptasi dan pelajari daripada negara-negara serantau. Mungkin Prof boleh kongsikan mengenai situasi ini.
Okey, kalau saya nak pecahkan daripada ekonomi domestik kepada ekspor sektor ekspor. Bukan hanya Malaysia dan tetapi seluruh dunia sebenarnya sedang berunding dengan Amerika Syarikat dengan pentadbiran Trump ya. Apakah hala tuju ya, kita rasakan tak sampai lagi 50 hari ataupun 60 hari. Dan saya tak pun terkejut kalaulah yang 60 hari itu yang diberikan tempoh oleh Trump itu dipendekkan maupun dipanjangkan juga. Ini bergantung kepada situasi di Amerika Syarikat itu sendiri. Jadi kehambatan inilah yang menyebabkan banyak negara sukar termasuk Malaysia untuk membuat unjuran ke hadapan. Ketidakstabilan perdagangan antarabangsa ini menyebabkan dunia mencari arah dan kalau kita tengok banyak daripada data-data unjuran daripada Bank Dunia ya daripada OECD sendiri telah menetapkan bahawa tahun ini perdagangan dunia akan turun. Dan inilah yang akan menyebabkan ataupun the underlying factor yang akan menyebabkan ekonomi domestik kita akan juga turut perlahan pada suku ketiga maupun suku keempat kerana ketidaktentuan yang berlaku pada suku kedua ini. Jadi pada masa itu bila berlaku persetujuan semula mungkin kilang-kilang ataupun ya yang mengekspor barang keluar negara akan memperlahankan pengeluarannya. Pada masa yang sama juga ya akan mengkaji semula apakah pasaran-pasaran baru yang ada. Ini antara yang hala tuju yang saya dapat lihat untuk suku kedua ini akan lebih perlahan daripada suku pertama ni.
Walaupun kita melihat ataupun menghadapi gelora ekonomi dunia dan sudah pasti penting untuk kita meneliti segala aspek komponen usaha dan inisiatif ini seperti yang telah dikongsikan oleh Prof agar kita dapat mengukuhkan lagi daya tahan ekonomi Malaysia walaupun kita kecil dan terbuka namun dengan pelaksanaan dan usaha yang kukuh dan dimantapkan oleh segala kalau kita cakap stakeholder ini semua pihak kerjasama kolaborasi sudah tentu kita dapat menghadapi apa jua gelora kecil ataupun besar. Sekali lagi saya nak ucapkan terima kasih kepada Profesor Madya Dr. Aim Hazmi Abdul Rashid merupakan penganalisis ekonomi UniKL Business School dan setiap perbincangan ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam astrawani.com dan di semua platform digital Astro Awani. Saya akan beralih kepada perkembangan ringgit yang ditutup rendah sedikit pada Rabu berbanding dolar Amerika Syarikat pada Rabu selepas Amerika Syarikat mencatatkan data ekonomi yang lebih kukuh. Pada 6 petang, unit tempatan susut kepada 4.2435 atau 2490 berbanding dolar Amerika Syarikat daripada paras 4.2425 pada Selasa. Ketua Ahli Ekonomi Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad Dr. Muhammad Afzal Abdul Rashid berkata, kekosongan pekerjaan Amerika Syarikat yang lebih kukuh daripada jangkaan pada April meningkatkan keyakinan terhadap daya tahan ekonomi Amerika dan membantu menaikkan dolar. Baik, itu adalah prestasi nilai ringgit Malaysia berbanding dolar USD ketika ditutup pada hari lewat Rabu semalam. Kita akan melihat bagaimanakah nilai ringgit Malaysia setakat pembukaan pagi Khamis. Ia berada pada 4.2335 dan pergerakan nilai ringgit Malaysia dalam tempoh seminggu berbanding mata wang dunia iaitu dolar Amerika Syarikat mengalami tren naik yang turun yang amat ketara. Lebih kurang kalau kita lihat dalam tempoh 7 hari antara nilai ringgit berada dalam keadaan yang kukuh ataupun terbaik adalah 4.2211 dan yang terendah telah direkodkan dalam tempoh 7 hari berada pada 4.259. Baik, ini adalah prestasi yang dapat kita saksikan dalam tempoh seminggu iaitu kalau kita lihat dalam tempoh ini tempoh seminggu bagaimanakah keadaan ringgit dan kita akan kembali semula untuk melihat bagaimanakah prestasi mata wang dalam tempoh sebulan. Tempoh yang lebih lama sedikit melihat kita sudah masuk pada bulan Jun 2025 dan ini adalah prestasi pada bulan Mei di mana nilai ringgit Malaysia apabila graf ini menurun mencerminkan nilai ringgit Malaysia berada dalam keadaan kukuh dan kita lihat antara nilai ataupun paras yang telah direkodkan dalam tempoh sebulan adalah 4.2029 manakala dan yang paling lemah kedudukan Malaysia adalah 4.3380. Baik, ini adalah sebersikit untuk kita memahami bagaimanakah perkara mata wang ringgit Malaysia menjadi di bawah pemantauan ataupun perhatian labuh setakat ini, dan ini adalah prestasi dalam tempoh dekat dapat kita saksikan setakat pagi ini. Saya akan beralih kepada prestasi Bursa Malaysia. Semalam telah mencatatkan peningkatan pada jam terakhir dagangan untuk ditutup lebih tinggi sedikit pada Rabu, dipacu oleh aktiviti pembelian saham harga rendah dalam saham tenaga dan telekomunikasi pada sesi lewat dagangan, kata seorang penganalisis. Pada 5 petang, FTSE Bursa Malaysia KSCI naik sebanyak 4.72 mata atau 0.31% kepada paras tertinggi harian, iaitu 1,507.97 daripada 1,503.25 ketika ditutup pada Selasa, sekaligus menamatkan penurunan berturut-turut selama 6 hari. Dan kita saksikan bagaimanakah prestasi pembukaan. Maafkan saya, kalau kita lihat dalam internet sekarang, kalau anda masuk dalam talian, dia akan mendapatkan security code untuk mengesahkan anda adalah seorang manusia agar kita tidak mudah digodam oleh sesiapa sahaja. Okey, baik. Kita kembali kepada prestasi Bursa Malaysia setakat pagi 5 Jun 2025. Pagi Khamis ia berada pada 1,510.29. Peningkatan sebanyak 0.15% kepada 2.32. Dan dalam tempoh 5 hari, pergerakan Bursa Malaysia mengalami trend penurunan. Daripada kita lihat permulaan lebih kurang 1,521.80 dan ia telah turun dan berada dalam lingkungan ataupun lebih kurang range 1,503.25, dan itu juga merupakan antara angka ataupun pergerakan trend Bursa Malaysia dalam tempoh 5 hari. Dan kalau kita ke belakang dalam tempoh lebih lama sikit, memandangkan kita sudah masuk bulan Jun, kita nak meniti bagaimanakah prestasi bulan sebelumnya, iaitu lebih kurang bulan Mei. Kalau kita saksikan bulan pertama, minggu pertama bulan Mei, iaitu lebih kurang minggu pertama, minggu kedua, kita dapat saksikan Bursa Malaysia sebenarnya mengalami trend penurunan yang perlahan-lahan. Namun ini adalah prestasi bulanan dan juga dalam tempoh 5 hari, dan setakat pagi ini saya ulang berada pada 1,510.60. Baik, teruskan bersama kami, jangan ke mana-mana. Banyak lagi laporan yang akan kami bawakan dan Niaga Awani akan beristirahat dan kembali selepas ini.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Cara kita mendapat berita kian berubah. Melalui media sosial maupun saluran digital yang lain serta kaca TV. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini.
Kita buat sesuatu yang berbeza.
Berteraskan acuan verifikasi yang diamalkan supaya setiap fakta adalah sahih. Daripada analisis pelbagai sudut yang mendalam, laporan-laporan khas dan perbincangan yang membina negara. Inklusif, suara rakyat kami ajukan. Keseimbangan persepsi kami pastikan. Kerana setiap cerita mempunyai impak yang tersendiri dan perlu dibawa dengan penelitian yang terperinci. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada. Saluran berita paling dipercayai di Malaysia.
Memang best gila, sumpah tak tipu.
10 to 10 lah.
Honestly, it was so fun.
Nak ikut boleh.
Isi dalam ni rapat dengan rakyat-rakyat Malaysia, lawak-lawak pun nostalgia.
Saya rasa macam sangat-sangat terimbau masa zaman-zaman kecil.
I've been laughing all the way.
Lawak-lawak yang memang tidak terahan. Korang macam, wait,
Korang kena rasa bangga sebab ini adalah produk Malaysia.
dia melebihi expectation saya. Kena enjoy.
Ada faham?
5 lelaki penghantar makanan didakwa di Mahkamah Magistrate Bangi atas tuduhan membunuh seorang pemandu kereta lelaki dalam satu kejadian.
4 sungai di sekitar kawasan perindustrian Pasir Gudang di Johor termasuk Sungai Kim Kim didapati tercemar dan berada pada tahap yang membimbangkan. Kerajaan sudah mulakan inisiatif untuk menggantikan kenderaan operasinya kepada kenderaan elektrik EV dalam skala kecil terlebih dahulu.
Malaysia bersedia menerajui pembangunan bandar kecerdasan buatan AI ataupun AI Smart City di ASEAN. Menteri Digital Goh Bin Siew berkata pada masa ini terdapat beberapa bandar raya di negara ini sudah melaksanakan usaha menjadi bandar pita. Namun bergerak ke hadapan, apakah antara cabaran yang perlu kita atasi dengan segera? Apakah antara langkah yang boleh kita perkasakan apabila kita bercakap mengenai Smart City AI di ASEAN. Saya mempersilakan Muhammad Sirajuddin Jalil, merupakan Presiden Persatuan Pengguna Cyber Malaysia MCCA. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Siraj kerana sudi meluangkan masa bersama kami. Sekali lagi kita melihat antara harapan, impian dan juga hala tuju yang besar, sebab kerana ia bukan kalau kita lihat antara untuk menyumbang kepada pertumbuhan ekonomi, tapi ia adalah antara usaha yang kita harus pastikan kita dapat seimbangkan manfaatnya dan juga risikonya. Mungkin boleh kongsikan pertama sekali, adakah infrastruktur digital dan tadbir urus bandar pintas Smart City di Malaysia ni benar-benar bersedia untuk melonjak ke tahap kepimpinan serantau dalam pembangunan bandar AI, atau kita masih lagi perlu tangani setiap bentuk jurang teknologi antara bandar besar dan juga kawasan luar bandar terlebih dahulu? Bagaimana?
Okey, terima kasih Nina. First of all, bila kita sebut tentang Smart City ni, sudah pasti punca kuasanya adalah infrastruktur telekomunikasi, yang mana coverage internet itu memainkan peranan penting dalam melaksanakan pelaksanaan Smart City itu tadi. Kalau tengok kepada data ataupun statistik yang dikeluarkan oleh pihak MCMC, coverage untuk 5G itu telah pun mencapai lebih daripada 80% di seluruh negara. Walau bagaimanapun, masih berlaku jurang digital, sebagai contoh di kawasan utama bandar lah, di Selangor sebagai contoh, masih berlaku jurang digital di antara kawasan yang tepu bandar itu tadi dengan kawasan yang pinggiran-pinggiran bandar. Jadi mungkin ada usaha yang dibuat oleh pihak MCMC sebagai contoh untuk memperkemaskan jurang itu. Dan selain daripada soal coverage telekomunikasi itu, dasar dan polisi yang dibentuk oleh pihak PBT juga memainkan peranan. Kerana Smart City ini sudah pasti menjadi tanggungjawab kepada pihak berkuasa tempatan. Sebagai contoh di Kuala Lumpur, peranan yang perlu dimainkan oleh pihak DBKL sangat penting. Sebagai contoh di Putrajaya, kita ada Perbadanan Putrajaya sebagai contoh. Jadi untuk membangunkan Smart City itu perlu ada dasar yang jelas di peringkat PBT supaya pihak pemain industri, pihak pengguna, warga setempat dapat memahami dasar berkenaan, penyampaian yang cukup jelas, komunikasi yang dibuat oleh pihak pemegang punca kuasa itu pun jelas, maka dia membentuk satu kesatuan dalam menggerakkan agenda berkenaan. Dia tak boleh tepuk sebelah tangan lah Nina, kan? Maksudnya kerajaan nak buat, tapi pemegang taruh itu tidak disatukan, disinkronis. Maka akan berlakulah ketimpangan dalam usaha kerajaan untuk melihat agenda Smart City itu tadi.
Dan dalam mendapati cabaran seperti integrasi sistem AI, pengurusan data awam dan keterangkuman digital, apabila saya listkan perkara ini memang nampak best, tapi apakah kekuatan ataupun model kejayaan dari negara ASEAN lain seperti Singapura, Vietnam ataupun Thailand yang boleh Malaysia pelajari dan adaptasi agar pelaksanaan SCEKL 25 memberi impak yang sebenar? Kerana kita tahu kalau kita nak serap semua benda tak boleh, tapi mungkin daripada setiap negara mungkin dia boleh ambil aspek teknologi AI semiconductor, tetapi negara lain boleh kita ambil daripada aspek pendidikan. Apa pandangan Siraj mengenai perkara ini?
Saya rasa antara negara yang advance dalam polisi berkaitan AI ini adalah negara jiran kita, Singapura, yang mana mereka ada AI governance framework sejak tahun 2010. 2020, lebih awal daripada negara kita. Dan ialah mungkin faktor negara Singapura ni saiz mereka pun kecil, dan juga kekuatan utama mereka banyak syarikat teknologi gergasi berpengkalan di negara mereka lebih lama, dan ada banyak inovasi yang lebih mudah diimplementasikan di dalam negara mereka. Maka dia menjadi satu rujukanlah sepatutnya daripada negara kita terhadap bagaimana Singapura membangunkan dasar berkaitan AI itu tadi. Dan ada juga di negara seperti Vietnam, mereka menekankan soal vocational, tenaga pekerja mahir untuk pembangunan sektor digital itu sendiri. Dan that's why Vietnam dapat memacu laju ruang di bahagian ataupun kluster ekonomi digital, dan ada elemen yang mungkin kita boleh belajar dengan Vietnam tu juga. Sebab Malaysia ni ada komposisi yang unik sebenarnya. Kita ada kemahiran membangunkan dasar yang unik sebab komposisi penduduk kita pelbagai, kita ada multi-racial di dalam negara kita. Maka setiap komponen itu tadi dapat memainkan peranan untuk mewujudkan nilai, bukan untuk kita saja, bahkan untuk nak tarik pelabur, nak menarik minat kepada pembangun teknologi gergasi luar untuk masuk ke negara kita dan menjadikan negara kita sebagai destinasi untuk mereka beroperasi sebagai contoh. Jadi ada banyak juga contohnya di Indonesia, mungkin dari contoh bagaimana mereka mewujudkan dasar kepada penduduk yang berkapasiti tinggi. Jadi ada peranan yang berbeza di setiap negara dalam ASEAN tu, dan Malaysia ni mungkin ada kekuatan untuk mengumpul maklumat itu dan realisasikan di dalam negara kita yang mempunyai komposisi penduduk yang pelbagai.
Dan Siraj, dengan sasaran menjadi negara pintar menjelang 2040 di bawah RFN4, bila dan di mana seharusnya kita mula untuk membentuk keupayaan AI yang sebenar daripada segi aspek tenaga kerja, etika, undang-undang, polisi, agar segala usaha ini tidak hanya menjadi retorik tetapi realiti?
Saya sentiasa berpegang kepada pendidikan sebenarnya, Nina, sebab kita punya dasar pendidikan digital kita masih belum lengkap, walaupun dia pun baru dilancarkan pada tahun 2023, dan dalam tempoh yang pendek ini 2023 juga kita menyaksikan mass adoption penggunaan generative AI, dan mana dalam tempoh 2 tahun ini perkembangan AI itu terlalu cepat, terlalu pesat, sehingga saya yakin kalau tanya di kalangan rakyat Malaysia ni berapa aplikasi terkait AI yang mereka generative AI mereka guna pakai, ada yang 2, 3, dan kalau ikut jumlah aplikasi generative AI itu sendiri, saya rasa hari ini dah lebih beratus dan mungkin beribu aplikasi berkenaan. Jadi proses pembangunan yang terlalu pantas, dalam masa yang sama aspek pendidikan yang masih ketinggalan, itu sepatutnya menjadi subjek utama kalau kerajaan nak membangunkan smart city itu tadi yang berteraskan AI. So kalau pembangunan teknologi terlalu cepat tetapi aspek pendidikan tidak selari, natijah yang boleh berlaku adalah kita akan lihat lebih banyak kenaikan kadar jenayah yang terkait dengan cyber itu tadi. Dan kita tengok hari ini sebagai contoh di New Zealand, ahli parlimen mereka sendiri pun mengetengahkan bagaimana image dia sendiri dah di AI kan kepada image yang tidak senonoh lah kan. Dan that's why perlu ada pendidikan, sebab ancaman kepada AI itu nanti bukan datang daripada pembuat teknologi. Dia datang daripada pengguna yang akan menyalahgunakan teknologi itu, yang akhirnya membentuk rantaian masalah yang sukar kita nak bendung. So, kita nak bangunkan smart city sangat bagus dan kita sangat sokong usaha kerajaan. Walau bagaimanapun kena lihat ruang yang kelompongan yang besar yang sepatutnya kita tutup lebih awal, supaya usaha itu dapat didokong bukan hanya soal mengelakkan masalah, tetapi usaha itu dapat disokong dengan kebijaksanaan pengguna itu sendiri mendokong usaha dan polisi yang dibuat oleh kerajaan. Itu.
Dan Malaysia sebagai peneraju AI untuk smart city ni, kita lihat antara impian adalah satu usaha yang sangat bagus untuk menjadi, sekiranya kita ingin menjadi sebagai hub serantau. Namun banyak aspek yang perlu kita teliti. Ada satu poin yang telah dikongsikan oleh Siraj yang saya gemar tadi, proses pembangunan digital terlalu pantas, tapi daripada aspek pendidikan kesedaran itu agak perlahan, dan penting untuk kedua-dua ini bergerak sama laju dan selari. agar kita dapat memastikan tiada yang ketinggalan, terutamanya yang berada di kawasan-kawasan rentan ini. Sekali lagi saya nak ucapkan terima kasih kepada Muhammad Sirajuddin Jalil, merupakan Presiden Persatuan Pengguna Cyber Malaysia MCCA, dan setiap perbincangan ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam astrawani.com dan di semua platform digital Astrawani. Baik, kita akan beralih kepada perkembangan AWANI International. All right, we're at a pivotal moment in global trade where shifting US tariff policies, especially those introduced since April 2025, are not only reshaping global supply chains but also testing the resilience and adaptability of ASEAN economies. Countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia and Malaysia are feeling the pressure, but they're also exploring new strategies to diversify markets, strengthen regional integration and reduce over-dependence on any single economic partner. At the same time, ASEAN is navigating a complex geopolitical landscape, balancing its deepening ties with the US while managing its economy interdependence with China. And we have our guests already on the set with us to help us understand the situation and what our future holds for us. Thank you very much for joining us, Mark Mealy, the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer, US ASEAN Businesses Council. Again, I would say thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you here. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. It's great to be here in Malaysia. Malaysia is like my second home in ASEAN, so it's good to be here.
You've been here for how long already?
On this visit, about a week.
About a week, okay. Yeah. Well, I'm especially welcome you a bit late. Again, we'll talk about ASEAN tariff. This is actually not a very, we can say it's a very hot topic nowadays, especially when we talk about trades and then we talk about relationships with ASEAN countries, advanced emerging economies. Probably we can share with us, what's your perspective about the recent tariff? We can see the two brothers, big brothers, fighting from 145 to 130, just like that, a snap of the fingers.
Yeah, yeah. So clearly, you know, the US-China economic relationship is probably the most significant one in the global economy today. Clearly, we are in a period of an evolution of that relationship. One might call it decoupling or strategic competition, whatever term you want to use. It really reflects a desire to sort of see a change in the really strong nature of that relationship. And so the tariff question becomes one of the tools or instruments by which both governments are trying to shape how that relationship will evolve over time.
All right, this is how can we understand it's. They say there's a new order, a global shift in the trade world, and given the disproportionate impact of tariffs on countries like Cambodia, Vietnam, and Thailand and ASEAN, we can see almost half of ASEAN were been hit with tariffs, half of it. And then we want to say, how can ASEAN countries diversify their export markets and reduce heavy dependence on the US markets? Not we're trying to get away from the war, but we're trying to keep our interests safe for the people.
I think for countries in Southeast Asia, which obviously are major trading partners of both countries, both the US and China, this is a moment where countries really now need to think through how can they really maintain their competitiveness with the entire world, even as maybe their bilateral ties with China or the US may evolve over time. I think for countries in Southeast Asia, it is a bit complex because it's geopolitics. There's also other dimensions around supply chain linkages. In a sense, China is one of the factors that makes ASEAN so globally competitive. At the same time, China is a big market for both United States companies, but also ASEAN companies. So I think that makes maybe a difficult landscape that ASEAN governments have to kind of figure out ways to navigate. One of the things that we're seeing in terms of the US private sector, we're very excited about this part of the world. People know this is where the growth is in the world. And so therefore, there's a real desire to make sure that as the governments in Southeast Asia figure out how to navigate, we would hope they would continue to engage, of course, with the United States as an important market, not have to be put into a position of choosing one market or the other. And then also, are there opportunities to even strengthen domestic economies to make them even stronger and even more attractive globally?
From your perspective, how effective are ASEAN government strategies to navigate bilateral agreements, regional agreements to, we can say, mitigate the impact of US tariff?
Yeah. So I think we've already seen a number of countries as they've trying to figure out what's the best way to navigate the change in U.S. trade policy has included, let's join other free trade agreements. So we've already seen examples of other countries in Southeast Asia saying, we're going to maybe join CPTPP as another preferential free trade agreement, which the U.S. companies would find very valuable. So that's one thing. Second thing, I think governments in the region are now saying, what can we do more in terms of our own regional economic integration agenda? So things like successfully concluding the Digital Economy Framework Agreement by the end of this year would be a big thing for all 10 countries in ASEAN. And there's probably other initiatives like the upgrading of the ATIGA agreement. And last but not least, even successfully concluding the FTA with Canada, that is in the process. All these kinds of things, I think, represent ways which countries can diversify their partnerships during this challenging time.
Diversify is very important for us to explore new and bigger markets. Yes. I'm sorry, are you okay?
I'm fine, yes.
But we want to take a look at this, but probably we caught in the fire of a war between not only are they threatened towards each other, but in terms of one side wants to dominate more than the other in terms of the trading world. And how do you access, what are some of the challenges that you see for us to diversify portfolio, diversify our market value? It's not easy because every country, even in ASEAN, even within the internal, we have our own standard regulation and policy that we have to adhere to. What's your thought on this?
Yeah, I think these are opportunities right now for the governments in the region to say, while we're all 10 individual countries in ASEAN, the success of all of us individually is linked to how effectively we are integrated with each other. And so if there are ways to really move sort of the key components of the ASEAN economic community agenda forward, in other words, harmonizing more regulations across all 10 countries, creating more opportunities for businesses if you are approved to operate in one country, how easy then should it be to also be approved to operate in other ASEAN countries? So these are, we all know, are works in progress. They are sometimes politically challenging, but I guess we would make the argument that now more than ever, this is the kinds of efforts and the kind of directions that ASEAN countries need to really emphasize going forward. I'll give you one example. We think right now the Malaysia-Singapore Joint Special Economic Zone project is a very potentially strategic opportunity, not just to sort of create another location where companies can really come and invest, but actually maybe to devise brand new rules for how companies could operate. Maybe look at ways of promoting more renewable energy supplies for the companies that will locate in this special economic zone. We think, again, this is an opportunity to think more strategic about projects like that actually could have a real broader regional impact.
And then we can see we can have more space and opportunity to think and disclose any strategic moving forward in mitigating this impact. Mark, based on your perspective, your own personal value, how do you assess the long-term implications of US tariff policy towards the ASEAN's role in the global value chain, especially in electronics, textile, and even agriculture?
Yeah. So we've certainly seen the evolution of how the U.S.-China relationship has evolved, and more investors and companies sort of adopting their sort of China plus strategies, right? That presented big opportunities for economies in Southeast Asia. And we've seen a lot of investment move into Southeast Asia, again, to maybe get away from the U.S.-China relationship, but then also to still be globally competitive. Now we have this new challenge, in other words, the change in U.S. trade policy. Once again, it is sort of maybe the equivalent of another sort of shock to the system. And I think countries in the region, as they're kind of assessing, how can we turn that shock into, again, mitigating the negative dimensions of it, but also where can we take advantage of opportunities? So, for example, as companies are thinking through, like, wow, we'd like to find those parts of the world where maybe there's, relatively speaking, more certainty to help us navigate right now global uncertainty. If ASEAN and individual ASEAN countries can be perceived as those places where there's greater certainty of policy, of regulations, of reforms, I guarantee you companies and investors will say, we're looking for certainty. And we're going to go to the places where there's growth, where we have relative more certainty. And if ASEAN countries can say, we are that part of the world where the growth is here, there's clarity of policies, there's improved regulations. I think that will help, again, seize the opportunities and maybe mitigate the potential challenges.
And definitely it's amazing how you share until this now discussion. It's how can ASEAN achieve success, not only individually, but together. To what extent do you see the US tariffs as a geopolitical tool aimed at countering China's influence on ASEAN?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's be honest, there's a global competition between the US and China, particularly in terms of economics. We would make the argument that where that competition is really happening, it's in Southeast Asia. So this is the place where the competition is happening. So we're seizing the fact that the change in terms of the tariff policy, but also the negotiations that are going on are actually generating some new commercial opportunities. We are seeing governments in Southeast Asia maybe adjust certain policies to create more room for US companies. So from a commercial point of view, that's a good thing. The flip side, of course, is that in some instances, we want to make sure that this change in US policy doesn't maybe create a sense of America is no longer the strong, trusted trade partner that it has been for many, many years, because we know other competitors will probably try to take advantage of that and say, hey, we are now more of your trusted trade partner. And so we want to make sure that that doesn't happen, because we think at the end of the day, countries in Southeast Asia, their interests are best served when they are able to engage both the United States as well as China, as opposed to being forced in some kind of a zero-sum scenario.
All right. This is a very important and critical situation that you have just shared with us, Mark. And it's very important for us to see maybe a new role of how ASEAN can play a strategic role to mitigate all of these implications, effect, and policy. Not only that, ASEAN also been hit with high tariffs by the US, but also we are facing the effect of dumping. For example, like we know that Malaysia has now has introduced around 9 anti-measure dumping for the past 10 years, and then we say Indonesia, they are neutral, but we can say almost 150 factories were developed on 2024 alone. And then for Vietnam also, we can see it has become a Chinese transshipment hub for Chinese product, and US is sitting that with 46%.
Exactly.
So towards one goal, to mitigate all the effect of splash zone from the tariff, how is maybe checking on the progress, on ASEAN progress towards the goal outlined in the KL Declaration recently, particularly in creating a deeply integrating and resilient regional economy, as we're not managing tariff rate, but we're also managing the impact from both of our big countries.
Yeah, that's you've just described really what I think the key sort of strategic imperative is for ASEAN countries. In other words, there's no way ASEAN countries are going to sort of disengage with America or disengage with China. But as the way of sort of how to position ASEAN in terms of these pressures that may be coming from one or the other, this is where, again, we'd say now is the time to really stress, how can we be more globally competitive? So again, countries joining more free trade agreements, deepening integration efforts in the region, I think would be very helpful. And we're certainly, the one thing we're also seeing is that as the governments are trying to figure out their respective strategies, to understand that there can be a hybrid approach here. In other words, there can be things that can be done to really enhance economic and commercial with the United States, even in response to maybe higher tariffs. And of course, every country in the region has to sort of do their own calculation as to how much they really can afford to navigate a different relationship with America. Like Vietnam, obviously, a larger share of their trade with the world is with America. So therefore, their position is a little bit different than, say, Malaysia. Malaysia obviously has trade with the world, and a piece of that trade is with the United States. So obviously, Malaysia has a sort of a different calculation to make in terms of how to figure out what's the sweet spot, what's the middle ground, so to speak. And again, not being forced to sort of pick one or the other. Because one of the things is very, very clear. America is the major source of foreign direct investment to ASEAN. China is the biggest market for ASEAN's products. Obviously, you don't want to have to pick one or the other, because if you make such a choice, it will have a negative economic impact on your domestic economy. So again, I think that's what the governments in Southeast Asia really have to think through. How can we, again, find that sweet spot in between both situations?
even though we can coexist in a lot of aspects and components, even if we don't like each other. Especially with our big brothers, it's very important for us to play not only the role in the global supply chains, but in neutrality. I was saying that, okay, we're still good with you. We want to do business with you, same as well to China. That is something that we propose, ASEAN is proposing, that voice, that initiative, and that education. But help us understand this a bit more. What are some of the biggest challenges that ASEAN faces in narrowing the development gap and fostering inclusive growth amid external factors? That's something that is beyond our control.
Yeah. And which I think this is the kind of thing, as someone that's been working in Southeast Asia for many, many years, I've often said to government officials that ASEAN's long-term success will not only be driven by the countries that are the most advanced and the most developed, but also how are the less developed parts of ASEAN moving forward in terms of the economic integration agenda. I think there are efforts that need to be made to ensure that the smaller countries like Cambodia, Laos, and obviously the situation in Myanmar is very challenging, but those societies need to feel that there are more benefits for them nationally as integration in the region is deepened, and mechanisms need to be put in place that allow them, for example, to participation like in the Digital Economic Framework Agreement, but maybe understand that they can't make all the reforms at the same pace as Singapore or Malaysia will make, that they need to have longer phase-in periods or longer time frames, but they're included is the most important thing. The other bigger, I think, and this is where I know U.S. companies, I think, are real champions in, is the fact when it comes to the region and for inclusive development, human capital development is so important. And I think U.S. companies, I think, are the best in the world when it comes to training the people who they employ. Because as you know, when a U.S. company sets up an investment in Malaysia or Singapore, they're not going to bring over 10,000 Americans. They're going to employ 10,000 Malaysians, 10,000 Singaporeans, 10,000 Vietnamese, and those individuals are going to benefit from the opportunities of building their own skills. I think that'll be really, really important. And last but not least, I think the questions around sustainability and energy transitions, these are, I think, complex questions that countries nationally are trying to navigate. Regionally, there's benefit from being deepened in the cooperation. As we know, we're seeing now, how can ASEAN be more effective at having renewable energy that's produced in one part of ASEAN be transmitted to where renewable energy demand is growing in another part of ASEAN? To me, those types of initiatives, as they're trying to move forward, would be very, very valuable for that more inclusive and sustainable development that I think ASEAN has the potential to really achieve.
It's not an easy work, Mark.
I'm very optimistic in that regard. I think, you know, this part of the world has navigated big challenges before: the 1997 Asian financial crisis, COVID pandemic, the 2007 financial crisis in our society. If you look at all those periods of time, ASEAN has really sort of stepped up and figured out we have agency. We're not just simply passive takers in this world, and we can and figure out when does it make to be strategically neutral, when it's based upon the calculation of their own interests.
Depends on the situation.
Exactly. So I think those are experiences that'll probably be very necessary in this current period.
All right, understand. I like that very point. We're in our last session of the time. Maybe you can share with us. Probably we need to look at internal first. Internal, how can we work together from the governments to business, private sector, until all the small stakeholders from there. And then one country, okay, we internal are already in prep, then we can work together with another country. But we can work effectively if the another country, we can say, all strategy is aligned, then we can work together. So that is one of the ways. Moving forward, in what ways can the US ASEAN Business Council facilitate stronger private sector engagement to address supply chain vulnerabilities and promote sustainable growth? Maybe we can say that usually private sector have their own aims, agenda. It's not that they want a cooperation, but their objective is a bit different. But this time, we need support to a bigger narrative. We need from everyone's support. Share with us, Mark.
I think one of the good things, even during this current challenging environment and with greater uncertainty, we're seeing governments in Southeast Asia actually do a lot more direct engagement with companies and really sitting down with companies to say, hey, we really want to understand what your priorities are. And generally, you know you want to expand business, so we know that's your priority. We also want to understand where you see the concerns or the challenges. I think that also creates the opportunity for governments to really reiterate what are our priorities? What are we really looking for from the private sector? So I'm optimistic again that in some of these conversations, you do see more sort of win-win scenarios that emerge, so to speak, out of those kind of direct relationship building. And then last but not least, I think, from the U.S. business community point of view, there's still a very, very strong commitment to those kinds of broader public policies, sustainability, for example. Even as maybe government policy value on those kind of topics change, from the U.S. private sector point of view, it is still critical. It is still an area where companies want to work together with governments and figure out pathways forward. And I've always made the argument how ASEAN countries, and as individual countries and as a region, figure out that delicate balance between still promoting good economic growth, but also growth that's more sustainable, it's actually probably going to create some very valuable lessons for other countries around the world. Countries are going to watch if a Vietnam, which is growing very rapidly, for example, attracting lots of investment, therefore has great demand for energy, but is also increasing the amount of energy it supplies from renewable sources, that's like threading the balance properly, because you're providing the energy security, but you're also supporting the energy transition. The lessons that a Vietnam, that a Singapore, that Malaysia figure out in this journey, I think will be globally relevant and significant for other parts of the world. Because this is the part of the world where you think about it. When the global economy is slowing, for ASEAN, it doesn't slow as much. When the global economy is growing, for ASEAN, the growth is faster. So in a sense, this is a part of the world where the world watches to see how ASEAN figures these complex challenges out.
This is a very amazing insight. Again, thank you for helping us share tariffs administration, ASEAN role, and how does the ASEAN play in a very global supply chain moving forward. Again, I would say thank you very much to Mark Mealy, Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer, US ASEAN Business Council. Again, thank you very much and hope to see you soon. And definitely for all of you who missed out this discussion and interview, you can watch it in astroni.com and across all social media platforms. All right, for next update, the benchmark S&P 500 stock index ended modestly higher on Wednesday, supported by technology shares, but some early gains evaporate as weak data revealed the economic toll taken by President Donald Trump's erratic trade policy. The services sector contracted in May for the first time in nearly a year, while businesses paid higher input prices, a reminder that the economy was still at risk of slowing growth and rising inflation.
The ADP National Employment Report showed U.S. private employers in May added the fewest number of workers in more than 2 years.
We saw really weak ADP numbers come out this morning, along with very weak PMI, Purchasing Managers Index numbers, the weakest we've seen in roughly a year. That's driven bond yields down about 10 basis points across the curve, from 2s all the way out to 30s. So much lower yields on the day have led to a little bit higher stocks. Both the S&P, NASDAQ are a little bit higher today based on weak jobs numbers and the prospect that we'll see weak jobs numbers on Friday, and the prospect that the Fed may very well cut 25, if not 50 basis points come September to head off unemployment.
Investors await Friday's non-farm payrolls data for more signs on how trade uncertainty is affecting the U.S. labour market. Washington doubled tariffs on imported steel and aluminium to 50%, and Wednesday was also Trump's deadline for trading partners to make their best offers to avoid other punishing import levies from taking effect in early July. Investors focused on tariff negotiations between Washington and trading partners, with Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping expected to speak sometime this week as tensions simmer between the world's two biggest economies. May saw the biggest monthly increases for the S&P 500 index and the tech-heavy Nasdaq since November 2023, thanks to a softening of Trump's harsh trade stance and upbeat earnings reports. The S&P 500 remains more than 2% below record highs touched in February. Barclays joined a slew of brokerages in raising its year-end price target for the S&P 500, pointing to easing trade uncertainty and expectations of normalized earnings growth in 2026. The S&P 500 gained 0.44 points or 0.01% to end at 5,970.81 points, while the Nasdaq Composite gained 61.53 points or 0.32% to 19,460.49. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 91.9 points or 0.22% to 42,427.74.
All right, now let's break it down what's happening in the US market. We're going to start from one of the biggest sector within the S&P 500, and every sector in industry, you see every size represents the market cap. For Microsoft, it's up by 0.19% as of this morning. We can see as of that, this is the performance of Microsoft within the S&P 500, which is up by 0.19%. And for NVIDIA, it's also up by 0.50%, one of the biggest companies within the within the semiconductors. And NVIDIA's newest chips have made gains in training large artificial intelligence systems. New data released on Wednesday showed with the number of chips required to train large language models dropping dramatically. ML Comments, a non-profit group that publishes benchmark performance results for AI systems, released new data about chips from NVIDIA and advanced micro devices, among others, for training in which AI systems are fed large amounts of data to learn from. While much of the stock market's attention has shifted to a large market for AI inference, in which AI systems handle questions from users, the number of chips needed to train the systems is still a key competitive concern. China's DeepSeek claims to create a competitive chatbot using far fewer chips than US rival. And that is the latest update within the NVIDIA semiconductor industry. And next is Apple, within the one of the biggest market within the consumer electronic, is down by 0.22%. And this is the performance of Apple and Alphabet's Google recent updates, which signed an agreement with the Chilean government during a meeting on Wednesday to deploy a 14,800-kilometer submarine data cable across the Pacific Ocean to connect with Australia in Asia, set to be operational by 2027. The pact, the first of its kind between the technology giant and a country, aims to bolster Chile's digital connectivity with ASEAN nations, including China, Chile's largest trading partner, while advancing its ambition to become a regional hub for Latin America. And that is the latest update within the Apple. The next update, we're going to go back to Microsoft, which is up by 0.19%. For Microsoft, and is offering free to charge to European governments a cybersecurity program launched on Wednesday to bolster their defenses against cyber threats, including those enhanced by artificial intelligence, it said. After a surge in cyber attacks in Europe, many linked to state-sponsored actors from China, Iran, North Korea and Russia, the program aims to boost intelligence sharing on AI-based threats and help to prevent and disrupt attacks. Increasingly, attackers employ generative AI to amplify the scale and impact of their operations that range from disrupting critical infrastructure to spreading disinformation. And next update on Amazon is also up by 0.74%. And recent updates on Amazon wants customers to know that artificial intelligence is not just for writing college essays. In a series of announcements Wednesday, Amazon demonstrated how stockroom robots, delivery people, and its sprawling warehouses will all benefit from a hefty dose of artificial intelligence, speeding packages to customer doorsteps. The company said it is forming a new group at its Lab 126 device unit focused on creating warehouse robots that will perform multiple tasks when prompted, a significant advance over today's robots that typically are designed for a singular job. According to them, using so-called agentic AI, these robots will be able to unload trailers and then retrieve parts for repair. All right, please stay tuned with us as my colleague Ibrahim Sani will be taking over right after this break.
mencipta peluang pekerjaan, membangunkan bakat tempatan dan pemindahan teknologi tinggi. Sabah kini berada di landasan tepat menjadi magnet pelaburan bagi industri serantau. Ikuti temu bual eksklusif AWANI Sabah Plus bersama Menteri Pembangunan Perindustrian dan Keusahawanan Sabah Yang Berhormat Datuk Fung Jinze, Isnin 9 Jun 2025, 9 malam di saluran 501 dan semua platform digital Astro AWANI.
11 Jun ini, sertai kami di Pavilion KL untuk Big Stage Alpha Showcase. Temui finalis yang anda nanti-nantikan. Persembahan daripada Hale, Sheila Amzah, Nadira, Wani Kerry, Isaac Vu, Kowax, Akim dan Amir Masdi. Datang awal dan tunjukkan My Astro app anda untuk masuk ke zon Superfan. Anda juga boleh memenangi pas fan meeting melalui Astro Rewards. Tunjukkan sokongan anda. Jumpa kami di Pavilion KL.
Thanks for joining us. This is The Economy. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. In my office right now is Christine Gadsby, the cybersecurity or the chief cybersecurity officer of Blackberry. Very recently, Blackberry, in collaboration with Talent Corp, has launched their cybersecurity center of excellence at Sabjaya, where they are going to partner with cybersecurity experts and trainers like SC2 as well as CompTIA, to deliver about 1,000 talents to be trained in the cybersecurity space. As we have discussed on this show in previous episodes, cybersecurity roles are one of the more needed roles in the space of technology. So Christine is perhaps the best person to discuss this with us. I think the first thing that I want to ask you is, why Malaysia as opposed to other markets within the region? Where do you see Malaysia fit in that whole general idea or general strategy of Blackberry in promoting cybersecurity competency in this region?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, Malaysia is really unique in how it leads in the ASEAN region for cybersecurity. I think you have a really good combination of strong policy with the Malaysian cybersecurity strategy. You have the need and the want to train, and you see the priority of needing to train skilled people to do cybersecurity work, and you put that as a priority. And you know, you follow that up with things like driving towards digital sovereignty, a really strong economy when it comes to the needs of digital sovereignty. You take security just incredibly seriously, and you have had the forefront to think about partnering with enterprise companies who have the deep, already technical knowledge and are willing to pass that on, and willing to partner with Canada and have it be part of their own strategy in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think there's just a combination of really great things. Absolutely has put Malaysia in the forefront. We actually have put our Asian headquarters here as well, just to help bolster that partnership. So it's incredibly thought-leading in how to really tackle Malaysia's challenge with cybersecurity talent.
The thing about this part of the world is that we are at the crosshairs of the larger crosshair of China versus US. And consistent with the ASEAN non-intervention policy, we tend to not take sides and we tend to do business with everyone. Doesn't this kind of geopolitical element put a bit of a risk factor, at least, something for Blackberry to think about when you think about enlarging your business in this part of the world?
Yeah, another great question. I think anytime there is a geopolitical shift or anytime there's a geopolitical tension where we feel it change, and you couple that with a digital transformation like this region is going through, you are going to cause a need for incredibly tighter security controls. Malaysia's done, again, a great job. I commend the Malaysian region for really answering that with policy. You've really stepped up and sort of written the rule book to drive a lot of the needed security changes, but absolutely, geopolitical weighs heavily on the need to do everything that you're doing.
So geopolitical stability, at least among partners of ASEAN, is indeed something of a high priority. But not many of these ASEAN leaders who are in town right now to talk about the ASEAN Summit really discuss cybersecurity as a top priority. I would not say, or I wouldn't go as far as saying that they wouldn't disagree that cybersecurity is not an important subject. It's just that there's so many other things that are put on the table for them to discuss and debate upon, leading to cybersecurity being one of the less important items. how do you see the talent development as well as the infrastructure and policy development of cybersecurity going to be upskilled amongst the countries here in this part of the world, considering that there's so many other pressing matters at hand that the leaders are thinking about right now?
You know, I think one of the things that is interesting in this region is that even though it tends to somewhat fall on a differing scale of the level of conversation, topic, hours of discussion, it's important to everybody. So no one will disagree. When I go around and talk to the different areas and regions of the ASEAN region, no one disagrees it's a priority. So I think it's just getting it into the right place where you can partner with companies like Blackberry and again, you know, areas of the globe like Canada to have sort of an answer to that where we're strategizing together so that we can help you worry about it instead of you having to worry about it, et cetera, right? So I think it is a shared goal. And the leaders that I've spoken to take it very seriously. So I do think you'll see, especially as the tensions in the globe continue to increase, you're going to see the priority increase effectively because it almost has to.
So when you look at a little bit of background is that you've been with Blackberry for close to 2 decades, and you've seen how it has been transformed from a rather retail company to an enterprise company leading to the cybersecurity world. You would know the progress of what things have been developing. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a crystal ball insight into what it's going to look like for the next 3 to 5 years, and perhaps what countries and companies must be thinking about right now in order for them to be able to skate where the puck is, so to speak.
Yeah, the biggest shift we are seeing right now is really the challenge around securing communications. If you think about the geopolitical shift, we are a supply chain. You know, we as humans are people talking on our phones, we're on our devices, we're entering in things to a computer web browser. We become a supply chain of information that criminals find very valuable. And secure communications is definitely being pointed out as a weak link. We've got probably 3 or 4 really major areas of that, and that is one, AI is really, developing a criminal toolkit. You know, it makes it much easier for them to intercept communications like this and use the data that they're finding. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is you have this really free supply chain. Everybody is using free applications. You know, we're all using them, whether it's, WhatsApp or Signal. We're having these government-grade conversations on them. We know that we are, with classified, confidential, secret information that is being passed around in these free applications that we know all of that metadata is available for. So it is public knowledge that that metadata is collected and sold, and attackers have access, again, through AI making it much easier. But it's also, the barrier to entry is very low. It's a very low cost for an attacker to go hire a service. They don't even have to do anything. Yeah. For a cost of a muffin and a cup of coffee, an attacker can literally just go pay a service to go get access to all of that data. It's absolutely mind-blowing what we're seeing right now as far as intelligence. So I think those 2 things are really what is really going to harness the higher level, as you say, priority conversations are going to be when we find more human error, accidentally adding people to conversations that are private.
When you said Signal, that's the only thing that I was thinking of.
Right. Well, I mean,
and the guy just stayed silent, and it was just awesome. The whole thing was just awesome.
But you see that happening, and that's not the first time, and it won't be the last time. It's just the first time you heard about it.
Sorry, Christine, that wasn't even an attacker, so to speak. It was just a guy that was invited in. That's it.
And that is human error. So you've got AI driving the attacker scenario. You've got human error, right? And there is a place for free, messaging apps. If I'm gonna, I'm stopping by the grocery store and I'm gonna pick up dinner. Yeah, okay. Oh, fine, right? Yeah. But highly regulated business, banking, government, that is not the place for those conversations, and we continually see that.
I would like to argue that human nature or psychology actually dictates that it's only natural for one person to just continue on staying on that platform and not migrate to another platform. And then, you extrapolate this with other actors within the same organization. They just wouldn't want to leave, say, WhatsApp and move on to other secured channels. It's just human behavior.
It is, but the one thing when you do the government-grade application like we have at Blackberry, you have the ability to control the administration of it. So, for example, a WhatsApp application, you can go download that from your app store. Everybody can. But if I administer a controlled communications platform, I have to invite you from my administration platform.
No.
So, you can't add it to have a conversation with me if the company didn't allow that.
I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying that, I guess the question now is on enforcement and how does organizations impose on that enforcement to use I mean, I can't imagine any government-grade organization saying things like, by all means use a free, text message or whatever.
Sure.
But it starts from the top, isn't it?
Absolutely, 100%. And you have to get into the bigger conversation of what does mobile device management look like.
Yeah.
If you're allowing employees to have access to mobile devices, then it needs to start there.
Yeah.
And not the conversation. You can have a policy, what you're saying, and you can say, okay, please don't use these.
There, and it has been there.
Right, it's always been there. But you really do have to start with mobile device management then and somewhat control that. But we do see when we do control that access, the security flows regularly in it, and it is what it's supposed to be. But what we do see also when there's no control, secrets are everywhere. And again, it's like $5 a month, an attacker can go pay a service. They don't even have to do anything. So I do think it needs to have a deeper conversation. But when it does have a deeper conversation, the priority does come up. So it is a good thing. We're seeing it here in Malaysia. Malaysia is using this currently, the secure services that we have, and we're seeing much tighter control over confidential information, whether it's being shared between you and I, or enterprise and government. It is working. So you just have to kind of prioritize it.
Your local partner here is Talent Corp. Based on the conversation that my organization, Terajui, has had with Talent Corp, they argue that anywhere between 300,000 to 500,000 jobs are going to be displaced because of AI disruption. Of that, more than half is going to be in the roles or in the aspects of cybersecurity. How do you tie this with talent management or resource management capability and readiness? And where do you see us closing that gap even further? I'm sure that by launching a cybersecurity center of excellence can actually close that gap somewhat, but I cannot imagine that one center of excellence can close 300,000 roles in the space, of 1 year or so on. So how do you see countries or companies close that gap even further?
We have to get creative in how you hire. This is a big effort, and it's not just in this region, it's an effort globally, but we have to definitely get creative on where we find the pools of talent. There are a lot of untapped areas. I think, when I think of this region especially, I think of like retired law enforcement who might be ready to go back into the workforce, right? They've already spent their career maybe investigating criminals.
They're driving Ubers, by the way, right now.
Right. Thank you. Right. Yeah. So maybe we bring them back in. There are, in where I'm from, a lot of stay-at-home moms coming back into the workforce that are saying, "Hey, this is a great area. How do I learn?"
Yeah.
Even I have a daughter who's neurodiverse, and she's disabled. She's autistic, but she reads patterns. So even going into that community and saying, "Okay, these people are great at reading patterns. Maybe they love to do it," and she also actually really does like to sit and kind of have a repetitive task.
Yeah.
We haven't yet tapped that market. We're just starting to tap that market of individuals.
Sorry, I just have to intervene. So the Yayasan Terajui has worked with PwC, the audit firm, to collaborate a neurodiversity center of excellence to train and hire and appreciate more neurodiverse folks in order for them to recognize patterns. But baby steps.
Baby steps.
It's just 5 hirees per year or something like that.
But that's okay, because it creates a pattern that can be repeated when it's successful, right? Once we have a model for that sort of thing and it can be proven, it will be adopted. I think it's really tough to get stuff like that off the ground. Like you're saying, someone has to really want to do that.
And strangely enough, it's PwC Texas that taught Petronas on creating that neurodiversity center of excellence, and seeing somebody from, I guess, Texas saying this again.
That's what I'm referring. So yes, absolutely. It does work. We are trying to prove the model that it works. I do believe it will be successful. I've seen it successful in my own life. So we have to get creative and go find the talent.
I mean, when HR departments interview people, they look for people that can communicate clearly, can collaborate with teams. I don't think these are the markers for having strong neurodiversity.
But I don't agree that every role needs that.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't. I'm sorry. We have to be, one of the things that we have to change as an industry is we have to stop putting markers on roles like that.
Yeah.
Lots of roles we don't need people to have a degree in this and a degree in this and a degree in this, and we have to stop asking for it, because we also, not only do we not need it, we discourage people from applying. Because then people look at it and they think, well, I can't do that.
Yeah, and then of course there's an exclusion risk, because the people or talents that you need would be in the neurodiversity background.
Exactly, and if we want to really have inclusion built into that, you're limiting those people right out of the get-go. So
now we're leaving cybersecurity. We're now talking about hiring, managing, trying to understand, and of course, HR departments only react towards what the top thinks. If the top doesn't think this way, it's very hard for organizations to adopt. do you feel that a lot needs to be done in terms of training the C-suiters and the government policymakers and so on?
100%. And this, I did a couple of years ago, I went around and I did a bunch of, with my own friendly CEOs, I know quite a few people who run companies, and I started asking them, and it was to prepare for a conference that I was presenting on this topic, a talk on. And I asked them, how many of you have this, a priority of hiring neurodiverse, more women, more differently abled,
women, yeah.
How much a priority? And every one of them, without a doubt, oh, it's so important, right? So then I followed up with the question, okay, well, what are you doing to, and it was crickets, because they realized that, yeah, it's so important. Well, what are you actually doing, though, to change the dynamic? They're not doing anything. I mean, most of them, a couple of them had I do these really tiny things, but what I realized in that was that we lack implementation and actually dedication of time, resources, ability to be intentional. It has to be intentional. You can't just say you want to do it. You then have to turn around and go do something about it. And so my follow-up question to all these leaders, do you know how to do any of this? Hands down, no. Hands down, no. None of them knew, and none of their HR people were training them in their own leadership development. In their own leadership development courses, there weren't any. They didn't know what to do. So I started with some basics with some of them, but it really hit me hard that it isn't that they don't want to be intentional. They just don't know how to be intentional. And so we really have to change the dynamic and have the C-suite be more intentional to realize this skill gap isn't going to get closed.
Yeah, but Blackberry is having a strong competency in the training aspect, but I don't know whether you have the competencies or the wherewithal to move into this whole changing the culture of how business should be. How do you bridge that gap between the things that you're good at and the things that needs to be done? Is there a middling gap there?
Well, that's why we partner with others, right? We aren't the answer for everything. We want to be a part of the dynamic of changing the culture. And so we have to partner with other people. And so that's why we've done this. We're here partnering internally with Malaysia. We're partnering with other training partners. What we're really good at is delivering 40 years of security excellence and products that do security really well and thought leadership. We have been training in security for a very long time. So we can bring the thought leadership, but we definitely, for scalability, have to have partners. We can't do it alone.
The next stage of conversation I would like to explore is in terms of the technical trainings that is currently being done, either in the Center of Excellence that you have here or somewhere that you've done globally. What will be some of the areas of concerns that needs to be addressed, particularly in the aspect of the technical training aspect of it?
So I think training is interesting. It's sort of end-to-end. There's this really lower level basic cyber hygiene pool that just needs to happen. And that we can talk about just that pool of, I need to understand the basics of security. I see in the future at some point where companies will probably have to require that of all their employees. It won't just be, I want a career in cybersecurity. It will be really, to work for this company, you need to understand password resets and, just basic cyber hygiene. Don't put your credentials into this web thing that you clicked on. That kind of thing, I believe, will have to be table stakes, right? Okay. So we've got that all the way into really tough practitioner. We just launched a ISSP program, things like that, where we're really going into some of the more certification roles and the more technical roles. But I don't see anything off the table for education. It's all got to have to be there because security is changing so much.
I'm sorry, I have a 73-year-old mom and an 11-year-old daughter.
I was gonna bring that up too. Yeah. My parents and my kids.
Yeah, and the millennials are bridging the gaps of these two worlds. It's just bizarre.
It is, but even them, right? There is a need, and I was thinking about this on the flight on the way over. How do we make education programs? I mean, how does anybody make education programs?
I'm not too concerned about my 11-year-old daughter.
It's my parents. My parents, I don't want them to lose their fortune, right? So, but how do we do that? We have to go lean in with the people that understand that group. And so that's kind of the thing is, I could tell you all day that it's really important to train your 73-year-old mom, but I'm not the one to put that training together. Who is the, probably that needs a working group of doctors that understand that, psychologists that understand how they think, maybe the memory care people that understand what patterns they can remember. It needs a think tank, and that's where I think we're having to think differently about it is going to be key.
So Malaysia as a government initiative has organized various structures possible. We have the National Digital Department. We have the Ministry of Digital. We have a few others, including the MCMC. And I do believe that many of them are coming up, including the National AI Office. I'm sure that many of these kind of initiatives are there. I'm not too sure whether you're open to providing critique on how we do things. Perhaps a better way of asking is the best practices across the markets that you operate in. Where do you see them work well, and in markets where they do poorly, and how do we stack up against that kind of benchmarks?
Great question. I will tell you this region is absolutely hands down leading in how they're delivering the policy. No, this is the truth. You can look at, and I invite you to go look at globally how things like this are being implemented, because I do this all over, I mean,
yeah, I'm
talk
sure.
to everybody all over the world.
Yeah.
I'm here once a quarter or so for a reason, and that's because the ASEAN region, particularly Malaysia, is the only place that I go where you have all hands working together towards the same goal. You go to other regions of the world and they're happy to write policy, but then they can't implement anything, or it takes forever to implement something because they're all arguing about it. Here it's a lot more synergy as far as you're going to be leading in the ASEAN region alone, but also in Malaysia in particular. Every time I come here, the conversation is always driven to the same goal. There isn't an influence of something that doesn't matter. It just seems to flow like that. So I do think it's critically important for Malaysia to keep going to prove that you can partner with enterprise, you can partner with other governments, you can lead in the region, because it is working.
But of course, ASEAN has markets where we are at different levels. And it's very hard to find a unifying factor, or at least across the board to find a uniform policy that can be implemented as a whole, as a region. Do you see this as a crippling factor?
That's a global challenge. I call that watermarking and crosswalking of security controls. So this is it, because it gets really complicated. And if you think about this, every security control ever written around the globe might require something like people need to have background checks if they work in a company.
Yeah.
We'll just take that, because
Yeah.
that would be everything, right?
Yeah.
We've got to keep track of that level of those background checks. Maybe they're looking for a criminal background, and maybe the next one is looking for how long have you lived at your address. Maybe the next one is looking for, what citizen are you of a country of. We have to watermark those and then crosswalk those across. That covers this policy, that covers this framework, that covers, how many of those. So it does get complicated very quickly. And it is messy because regions want different things. Nobody comes into this saying, hey, my shop that makes tires, rubber tires, has a way different set of security requirements than a bank.
Yeah.
The tire company wants to make the cheapest, best tire they can. The bank has a whole different level. So how do you make those relative? So in reality, when you think about things like that, they'll never be the same. They shouldn't be the same, but they have to work together. So there should be a low-level watermark of everybody should just have background checks, right? And then you can ratchet it up for how intense those get, based on the need of a tire manufacturer or a bank, right? So it is messy by design, but you harmonize well, and that's the critical point. You do a great job in this region of harmonizing that by industry, where I've seen that, it works well for you. It hasn't worked well in other parts of the globe.
Yeah.
So again, hats off to you for at least having the wherewithal to think about how to crosswalk those controls.
Working with China, does that add, risk in terms of how companies should approach things?
The big thing with working anywhere in the globe is we have to pay attention to what's happening with security risk altogether. It doesn't matter who you're working with as far as where the doors are open. Because honestly, the bigger crime that we're seeing right now is borderless. It's borderless. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. The impact is the same. What they're stealing is the same. The risk is the same. You don't want your conversations, you don't want espionage anywhere, let alone where it comes from. So it isn't really a regional barrier for me. It's just kind of looking at the whole risk of espionage. We're seeing it, so it's a big thing.
Finally, maybe the next 3 to 4 minutes, I want to ask you about Blackberry itself. As a company, it's awesome. I love Blackberry. I think I got my first Blackberry Bold when I first started working, so that gives you a hint on how old I am. Blackberry Storm as well, my God. But yeah, how is Blackberry today, and how will Blackberry be, or what will Blackberry be in the next decade to come?
So Blackberry
I watched the movie. I don't know whether...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So Blackberry is a fascinating story to me still, and I've been, with Blackberry for a very long time. But, we do have 40 years of securing communications, which is amazing. And it's been awesome to see the transformation.
I just can't believe it. It's 40 years.
It's 40 years, right? And to see the transformation that this company has done, it's incredible to watch. But it just goes to show the power of that handset. Had a lot of stuff running inside of it, right? It was the mobile device, but had all that security software, and that's what people really wanted to keep, aside from the keyboard, which I can't comment on. But you know what really people.
But it was an enterprise-ready device.
People really wanted that level of maturity, and so. What we did as a company is we took out all of that and made it available for everything, rather than just you had to have this phone. You know, we still have all the platforms that were in the phone. They're just now software based. So you can still use our unified endpoint management, which is what controlled the handset itself. You know, you've got our CCoE suite, which is the secure communications platform, which allows you to send encrypted. You know, this is again government grade encryption, not handing out ciphers at Starbucks encryption, because if it's not certified, you don't know what it is. Allows that for voice and for text messages and file sharing. So that's the second thing. And then we have ad hoc, which is critical events management. So natural disasters, which has been a big global issue, has been the typhoons, earthquakes, bridge collapses. We've seen it. That's a person management system where you can account for all of your employees. So, and then we still have the IoT side of the business, which is the, secure operating system that is in most of the vehicles that you drive. We secure stuff for all G7 governments and most of the G20, and NATO. So we're still that security company. It's just now it's software, which has been a fascinating ride to watch. Just kind of that happen over the
ebb and
years.
flow and the transformation.
Yeah, and I predict that BlackBerry, over the next 5 years, will just continue to deepen and getting back to that root of we are the secure communications company, like we've always been. So I think we'll just kind of continue on that, and especially with regions like this that really want data sovereignty. It's very important.
Great way to end, I suppose. That was Christine Gatsby, the Vice President as well as the Chief Information Security Officer of BlackBerry. You can learn more about the security work that BlackBerry does on their website, or you can find out more with what's happening at the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence at Cyberjaya at Talent Corp, as well as with us, Yasser Praju. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Catch you in the next one.